Does the soul continue its vigil after the body has departed? And what secrets might the final moments between life and death reveal? Discover the answers in this reimagined story in English, A Watcher by the Dead by the brilliant Ambrose Bierce. Brought to you by Classic Storytime Hub. Dive with us into the depths of psychological horror and classic mystery. In a quiet upper room of an abandoned house in San Francisco's North Beach, a man lay motionless beneath a pale sheet. The clock was nearing 9, and the only light came from a single flickering candle, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. The air outside was warm, yet the windows remained firmly shut, the blinds drawn tight, an unusual choice for a room meant to hold the dead. The furniture was sparse, an armchair, a small reading stand with a candle perched atop it, and a long kitchen table that now bore the weight of the lifeless man. Everything, the chair, the table, even the body, looked newly placed. Dust had not yet settled upon them, though the rest of the room told a different story. Thick layers of it coated the corners, and cobwebs hung like forgotten memories in the angles where walls met the ceiling. Beneath the sheet, the man's form was unmistakable. Even the features were sharply defined, carrying the eerie precision of a face ravaged by illness, a reminder that death leaves its own cruel signature. The room itself whispered of isolation. It did not face the bustling street, but rather a sheer rock face, the back of the building pressed tight against the hillside. Silence lingered, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant, lazy chimes of a church clock striking 9, each toll stretched out as if time itself were indifferent. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside, his gaze fixed on the still figure. As he crossed the threshold, the door swung shut behind him, almost as if it had a will of its own. A key grated in the lock, struggling against the mechanism, followed by the sharp click of the bolt sliding into place. Footsteps faded in the hallway outside, leaving him trapped within the dim, candlelit room, alone with the dead. He moved toward the table and paused, his gaze lingering on the still figure beneath the sheet. A slight shrug, almost casual, passed over his shoulders, and he turned toward one of the windows. With a practiced motion, he lifted the blind. Outside, darkness pressed close, absolute and unyielding. The glass was smeared with dust, but a quick swipe revealed the truth. The window was barred, the thick iron crossing it only inches from the glass, sunk deep into the stone of the building. He glanced at the other window, identical, strong bars, unyielding. Yet he showed no alarm, no heightened curiosity. He did not push or pry. If he was a prisoner, he accepted it without question, quietly compliant. Having satisfied himself, he settled into the armchair. From his pocket he drew a book, moved the candle stand closer, and opened to a page, letting the flame flicker over the text. The man himself seemed unusually composed for the situation. Not more than 30, with smooth brown hair and a dark complexion, his face was sharp and lean, high-nosed with a broad forehead and a firm, resolute jaw. Gray eyes, calm and unwavering, followed the words on the page, though occasionally they lifted to the body on the table. Not out of morbid curiosity, not from fear or defiance, but as if some detail in his reading gently reminded him of his surroundings. Every movement, every glance spoke of purpose. The watcher by the dead carried out his grim duty with intelligence and poise, meeting the weight of the room with an almost unnerving composure. After reading for perhaps half an hour, he reached the end of a chapter. Quietly, he closed the book and set it aside. Rising, he picked up the reading stand, carried it to a shadowed corner near one of the barred windows, removed the candle, and returned to the empty fireplace, where he had been seated moments before. Then, with deliberate calm, he approached the table. Lifting the sheet, he drew it back from the head of the body, revealing a thick mass of dark hair and a thin face-cloth. Beneath it, the features were even sharply etched, almost painfully precise. He shaded his eyes with his hand, peering at the still form with a steady, tranquil gaze. After a measured pause, satisfied with what he had seen, he carefully replaced the sheet and returned to his chair. From the candlestick, he took a few matches, slipped them into the side pocket of his coat, and studied the candle in his hand, measuring its length with a quiet calculation. Barely 2 inches remained. In an hour, darkness would claim the room. With a thoughtful exhale, he returned the candle to its socket and blew it out. Far across the city, in a physician's office on Kearny Street, 3 men lounged around a table, punch glasses in hand, smoke curling toward the ceiling. Midnight was approaching, and the punch had flowed freely. The host, Dr. Helberson, the gravest of the 3, was about 30. His companions younger still, all doctors. "The superstitious awe with which the living regard the dead," Helberson said, his voice steady, "is both inherited and incurable. One should feel no more shame for it than for an inherited flaw, like an inability in mathematics or a natural tendency to deceive." The others chuckled. "Shouldn't a man be ashamed to lie?" asked the youngest, a medical student named Harper, still new to the profession. "My dear Harper," Helberson replied with a calm smile, "I said nothing about lying. A natural tendency is one thing, the act itself is quite another." "But do you think," the other man interjected, "that this superstitious dread of the dead, so obviously irrational, exists in everyone? I, for one, feel nothing of it." Helberson leaned back, a shadow flickering across his face in the candlelight. "Oh, it is in your system all the same. It only takes the right conditions, what Shakespeare calls the Confederate season, to awaken. And then, my friends, it can reveal itself in ways most unpleasant, enough to shake your certainties. Physicians and soldiers, naturally, are less affected than most." "Physicians and soldiers," Mancher laughed, shaking his head. "Why not add hangmen and headsmen while we're at it? Let's round up all the assassin classes." Helberson chuckled softly. "No, my dear Mancher. Public executioners never gain enough familiarity with death to remain completely unmoved by it. Even they have limits." Harper, who had been helping himself to another cigar from the sideboard, returned to his chair. "And what exactly would you call the circumstances under which a man or woman might be forced to confront this weakness of ours?" he asked, speaking with a hint of theatricality. Helberson's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "Ah, well, I would say if a man were locked alone in a dark room in an empty house for an entire night, with a corpse for company, no bed covers to hide under, and he survived the ordeal without losing his mind, then, and only then, could he claim to be neither of woman born, nor, like Macduff, delivered by Caesarean. He would have faced death as few ever could." "I thought you'd never finish listing all these conditions," Harper said with a grin. "But I know a man, neither physician nor soldier, who would take every one of them for any stake you care to name." "Who is he?" Helberson asked, curiosity piqued. "Jarrett, a stranger here from my hometown in New York. I don't have money to back him, but he'll stake his own fortune." "How do you know that?" Harper laughed. "He'd rather bet than eat. Fear? He probably thinks it's some skin ailment or perhaps a peculiar kind of religious nonsense." Helberson's interest sharpened. "And what does he look like?" "Like Mancher here. Might be his twin." "I accept the challenge," Helberson said without hesitation. "Delighted, I'm sure," Mancher drawled, fighting off sleep. "Can't I join in?" "Not against me," Helberson replied. "I don't want your money." "All right," Mancher said, chuckling. "I'll be the corpse." The room filled with laughter, but the outcome of this reckless talk had already been set in motion. Later, when he extinguished his small candle, he did so with careful intent. He was saving it for some unforeseen need, perhaps half expecting that darkness would feel the same at any moment. If the night became unbearable, a little reserve of light might provide relief or even escape. At the very least, it would allow him to glance at his watch, a fragile anchor in the consuming black. No sooner had he snuffed out the candle and set it carefully on the floor than Jarrett settled into the armchair, leaning back with closed eyes, hoping for sleep. But it never came. Never in his life had he felt less drowsy. Within minutes, he gave up the attempt. What else could he do? To move blindly in total darkness was to risk bruising himself, or worse, stumbling against the table and disturbing the body of the dead man. Even in such a strange, isolated situation, the respect for the fallen held him in place, a quiet restraint that almost felt like duty. Jarrett told himself it was that sense of propriety keeping him fixed in the chair, though part of him knew better. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, he heard it, a sound from the direction of the table. He couldn't say what it was exactly, and he didn't turn his head. Why should he in this suffocating dark? Yet he had to listen, and listen he did. Suddenly, the room tilted. Vertigo seized him. He gripped the arms of the chair as a strange ringing filled his ears, his head pounding, his chest tight beneath his coat. Was it fear, or merely the intensity of his own focus? With a long, trembling exhale, his lungs emptied, then refilled in a great gasp, and just like that, the dizziness vanished. He realized he had been holding his breath nearly to suffocation, so absorbed in the sound that his body had betrayed him. Frustration surged. Rising, he pushed the chair aside and moved to the center of the room. Darkness made long strides impossible. His hands groped along the walls until he reached a corner, then followed the angles past the two barred windows. And suddenly, collision. The reading stand toppled with a crash, candle clattering to the floor, startling him and breaking the tense silence that had wrapped the room like a shroud. The reading stand clattered across the floor, making a noise that made him start. Annoyance prickled at him. "How the devil did I forget where it was?" he muttered, groping along the third wall toward the fireplace. "I must set things right." His fingers found the fallen candle and he lit it, the small flame trembling in his hand. Instantly his eyes snapped to the table, but nothing had changed. The dead man lay as still as before. The reading stand, however, remained on the floor, overlooked in his earlier attempt to put things in order. He swept the candle through the room, pushing shadows aside, scrutinizing every corner. Crossing to the door, he tested the knob with all his strength. It held fast. Relief, faint but tangible, eased the tension in his chest. Noticing the bolt he hadn't seen before, he secured it, then returned to his chair. Glancing at his watch, he noted it was 9:30. He held it to his ear, still ticking. The candle had burned visibly shorter. With careful hands he blew it out and placed it beside him on the floor. Yet, despite these small reassurances, Jarrett felt uneasy. The room, the darkness, the silent presence of the dead, they unsettled him. "What do I have to fear?" he scolded himself. "This is absurd, disgraceful even. I will not be a fool." But courage is not summoned by thought alone. It is not claimed by reasoning or reprimand. The more Jarrett tried to convince himself of the harmlessness of the dead, the more his emotions rebelled, weaving a dissonance he could neither quiet nor escape. "What?" he cried aloud, a sudden surge of frustration and fear breaking from him. "What? Shall I, me, who carries not a trace of superstition in my veins, I who have no faith in immortality, I who know, never more clearly than now, that the afterlife is nothing but the dream of desire, shall I lose at once my wager, my honor, my self-respect, perhaps even my reason, because some savage ancestors dwelling in caves and burrows imagined that the dead walk at night, that—" A faint, unmistakable sound interrupted him. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, regular, echoed from somewhere behind him, each one drawing successively closer. Girette froze, every muscle taut, his heart hammering as the shadows seemed to breathe around him. The next morning, just before dawn, Dr. Helberson and his young friend Harper drove slowly through the quiet streets of North Beach in the doctor's coupe.
"Do you still trust in youthful courage or the calm steadiness of our friend?" the elder asked, eyes scanning the dim streets lit by the shifting glow of gas lamps. "Do you believe he has lost the wager?" "I know he has," Harper replied, his voice weighted with a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Well, by my soul, I hope so," Helberson said, earnestly, almost solemnly. Silence hung between them, the streets gliding past like shadows. "Harper," the doctor continued, his tone heavy with concern, "I cannot shake a sense of unease about this. If your friend had not so arrogantly dismissed my doubts about his endurance, a matter purely of physical fortitude, and had not so casually insisted that the corpse be that of a physician, I might never have gone along with it. If anything has gone wrong, we are doomed, as we deserve." "What could possibly happen?" Harper asked, trying to steady his voice. "Even if things took a serious turn, which I do not fear, Mancher could simply resurrect himself and explain. With a real subject from the dissecting room, or one of your late patients, it might be different, yes, but as it stands—" Dr. Mancher had been true to his word. He was the corpse. For a long stretch, Dr. Helberson remained silent, the carriage crawling at a snail's pace along streets they had already passed 2 or 3 times. Finally he spoke, voice low and measured. "Well, let us hope that Mancher, if he truly had to rise from the dead, has exercised discretion. A misstep there could make matters far worse than they already are." "Yes," said Harper, glancing at his watch as they passed a flickering gas lamp. "Girette would kill him. But, Doctor, it's nearly 4 o'clock." Moments later, the 2 men abandoned the carriage, moving quickly toward the long-abandoned house where Mr. Girette had been confined, placed there by the terms of a wager so reckless it bordered on madness. As they approached, a figure came running towards them, urgency written in every stride. "Can you tell me," the man gasped, slowing to a halt, "where I can find a doctor?" "What's happened?" Helberson asked, calm but alert. "Go see for yourself," the man called, turning and sprinting on. Helberson and Harper quickened their pace. By the time they reached the house, a small crowd had gathered, moving in a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Heads poked from nearby windows, questioning, observing, oblivious to one another's inquiries. Some rooms with closed blinds glowed faintly as occupants dressed hastily, preparing to descend into the street. A lone street lamp opposite the door cast a thin yellow light, barely illuminating the scene, as if reluctant to reveal the full scope of the chaos. Harper paused at the threshold, hand on Helberson's arm, eyes wide with agitation. "It's all over for us, Doctor," he said, voice tense and urgent, a stark contrast to the casual tone he had carried just moments ago. "The game has gone against us. Let's not go in. I say we lie low." Helberson, composed, placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "I am a physician, and there may still be need of one." They climbed the doorsteps, about to enter, the open doorway lit dimly by the street lamp outside. The passage beyond was already crowded with men. Some had made it part way up the stairs and, barred from going further, lingered, hoping for another chance. All were talking at once, none listening, a tangle of restless voices and shoving shoulders. Then, from the upper landing, chaos erupted.
A man burst through a door, breaking free from those who tried to restrain him. He surged down the stairs like a force of nature, pushing aside the terrified onlookers, flattening some against the wall, forcing others to cling to the railing, gripping throats, striking savagely, shoving anyone in his path. He stepped over the fallen, relentless, unstoppable. His clothing was in disarray, hatless. His eyes burned with a wild, restless fire, more terrifying than his incredible strength. His smooth-shaven face was deathly pale, his hair a shocking frost white that glimmered in the dim light. At the foot of the stairs, the crowd parted instinctively. Harper leapt forward. "Jarrett! Jarrett!" he shouted. Dr. Helberson grabbed Harper by the collar and held him back. The man's gaze passed over them, unseeing, as he darted through the doorway, down the steps, and into the street. Moments later, a stout policeman, struggling through the throng, began pursuit, while heads of women and children pressed against windows, screaming directions and warnings. With the stairway now partially cleared, most of the crowd spilling into the street to witness the flight, Helberson and Harper ascended to the upper landing. At a door in the passage, an officer barred their way. "We are physicians," Helberson said firmly, and they were allowed through. The room was packed with men, dimly lit and pressed close around a table. The newcomers edged forward, straining to see over the shoulders of those before them. On the table, the lower limbs of a man lay hidden beneath a sheet, but the upper body was starkly illuminated by the beam of a bullseye lantern, held steady by a policeman at the feet. The rest of the room remained in darkness, save for the faint glow near the head. The man's face was ghastly, yellowed, repulsive, horrifying. His eyes were half open, staring upward, his jaw slack, lips and chin defiled with froth. A tall figure, evidently a doctor, bent over the corpse. He slid his hand beneath the shirt front, withdrew it, and placed 2 fingers in the mouth. "This man has been dead about 6 hours. A case for the coroner." He pulled a card from his pocket, handed it to the officer, and moved toward the door. "Clear the room. Out, all of you," the officer barked. Instantly, the body vanished as if snatched by shadows. Shifting the lantern, he swept its beam across the stunned crowd. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Blinded, confused, nearly panic-stricken, the men surged for the door, shoving, stumbling, and tumbling over one another, like the fleeing armies of night before the first shafts of Apollo. Helberson and Harper, caught in the tide, were carried out of the room, down the stairs, and into the street. "Good God, Doctor, did I not warn you that Jarrett would kill him?" Harper exclaimed, breathless once they were free of the throng. "I believe you did," Helberson replied, his voice calm, almost detached. They walked on in silence, block after block. Against the pale gray of dawn, the silhouettes of the hill-dwelling homes rose starkly. The city was stirring, the milk wagon already making its rounds, the baker's boy soon to appear, and the newspaper carrier venturing through the streets. Life, in its ordinary rhythm, moved onward, indifferent to the terror that had unfolded just hours before.
"It strikes me, youngster," Helberson said, a wry smile tugging at his lips, "that we've been getting far too much morning air lately. It's unwholesome. What do you say to a tour in Europe?" "When?" Harper asked, eyebrows raised. "Nowhere in particular. 4 o'clock this afternoon should do nicely." "I'll meet you at the boat," Harper replied, already grinning. 7 years later, the 2 men sat on a bench in Madison Square, New York, deep in familiar conversation. A figure, who had been watching them for some time without their noticing, approached. Courteously lifting his hat, revealing hair as white as frost, he spoke. "Pardon me, gentlemen, but when one has killed a man by coming back to life, it's best to swap clothes with him, and at the first opportunity make a break for liberty." Helberson and Harper exchanged amused glances. Helberson's eyes twinkled as he looked the stranger in the face. "That has always been my plan," he began, smiling, "and I fully agree as to its Then he froze, his face drained of color. Mouth open, he trembled as he stared at the man before them. "Ah, I see you are indisposed, Doctor. If you cannot treat yourself, Dr. Harper will surely manage." "Who the devil are you?" Harper demanded, his voice sharp. The man stepped closer, bending slightly, and whispered, "I call myself Jarrett sometimes, but for old friendship, I'll tell you, I am Dr. William Mancher." Harper shot to his feet. "Mancher!" he exclaimed. Helberson's hand gripped the bench in disbelief. "It is true! By God, it's true!" The stranger smiled, faintly, enigmatically. "Yes, it is true enough, no doubt." He paused, as if trying to recall something, then began humming a familiar tune, completely absorbed and seemingly forgetting the others were even there. "Look here, Mancher," Helberson leaned forward, curiosity sharp in his tone. "Tell us exactly what happened that night, to Jarrett, you know." "Oh, yes, Jarrett," he replied, shaking his head, a faint laugh escaping him. "You see, I overheard him talking to himself, clearly scared out of his wits. I couldn't resist the temptation to come to life and have a little fun. I really couldn't help myself. It was all in good spirits, though I admit I didn't think he'd take it so seriously. Truly, I didn't. And afterward, well, changing places with him was no small feat. And then, damn you, you didn't let me out." The words rang out with such ferocity that both Helberson and Harper instinctively stepped back, startled. Why, Helberson stammered, completely flustered. "We had nothing to do with it." "Didn't I say you were Doctors Hell-born and Sharper?" the man said, laughing, the anger fading into amusement. "My name is Helberson, yes, and this is Mr. Harper. But we are not physicians anymore. We are, well, hang it, old man, we are gamblers. And a very fine profession it is, very good indeed. By the way, I trust Sharper here handed over Jarrett's money honestly. A very honorable profession," he repeated thoughtfully, strolling carelessly across the room. "But I stick to the old one. I am, after all, High Supreme Medical Officer of the Bloomingdale Asylum. It is my duty to cure the superintendent."
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.